What's the family secret you're not supposed to know about? Story 1. I've always heard that my parents' divorce did not go well, but both my mom and dad were relatively adamant about not telling me until I turned 18, which I am now, and I still haven't heard the whole story. However, over the years, I've heard bits and pieces of what happened because my parents or family members occasionally slipped up. Currently, I know that during their marriage, my mom was not allowed to have any friends, nor was she able to talk to strangers without getting grief. She generally had to do whatever my dad said unless she wanted to deal with his anger. She filed for divorce when I was 2, at which point my dad proceeded to make her life extremely difficult during the court case. He tried to get full custody of me, which didn't happen, but he did get a half-and-half deal. He took my mom's car and somehow had it break down so she couldn't use it, accused her of multiple outrageous things, including being involved in illegal activity, and badmouthed her to his family. They didn't believe him, but they also didn't keep contact with my mom because they knew he'd cause trouble for them too. He also, at no point, ever paid child support. I have also been told stories of how I'd write notes to my mom saying I hated her and wanted to go to my dad's house instead, likely because he would tell me how awful she was, and I was young and believed him. I've since apologized and my mom laughed it off and told me she knew I didn't know any better. She has also said that she generally couldn't talk to him for anything and chose not to enforce any of the court mandates, the child support included, because she didn't want to stir anything up again. So yeah, apparently I've been in the middle of what might be the messiest divorce I've ever heard of. Edit. Some people are saying that if custody is 50-50, there isn't any child support. In hindsight, that makes sense. I may have misremembered the situation. As for my dad, yeah, I'm still in contact. He found someone a year or 2 after the divorce, and she lived with us for years until they got married, and are still married 10+ years later. I'd stop talking with him if I could, but it wouldn't be without also cutting off my stepmom, whom I grew up with, and my 3 half-siblings. My mom was always very clear about not getting angry on her behalf, which I try to respect, so currently I'm choosing to keep in touch. I haven't confronted him on any of this either, because ultimately it's in the past, and I think if I should have anything to learn from the situation, it's to handle things quietly where he's concerned. Not because that's the right thing to do, but because he has a knack for causing trouble. My dad's side of the family has mostly passed now, and those who are left are actually currently in a legal battle with him over the assets left behind, so they're hardly on his good side anyway. They're polite and friendly to my mom when they meet. Now that I'm 18, my mom no longer has to talk with my dad at all, which she is thankful for, before she had to plan trips and stuff. Story 2. In my family, I'm one of 6 girl cousins that are about the same age. One of them is my sister. A relatively distant family member has harmed at least 4 of us 6, all before the age of 5. It was brutal too, enough that they had visible injuries. My uncle got very drunk one day and told me about it. 3 of the girls went through therapy, but he's not sure they remember. One repressed it immediately, and as far as anyone knows, she has no idea it ever happened. Everyone has kind of just swept it under the rug, and it's just the thing that doesn't get talked about. To this day, my mom refuses to tell me if I was also affected. She has also warned anyone else who knows not to tell me, although honestly, I don't think she even knows. She tried to make sure I was never alone with him at all, so maybe not. The only one of the 6 I know who was never harmed is my sister, since we had moved away by the time she was born. Story 3. When I was 12, my mom's cousin Laura got married. Laura's sister Emily was the maid of honor. Emily gave a speech talking about how glad she was to finally have a brother and how much she loved Adam and welcomed him to the family. At this point, my grandmother turned to my mom and said very quietly, "Too bad they don't know about their brother." I asked my mom later about this. She was horrified that I had overheard and told me never to speak of it, but she did tell me what happened. So my great-uncle was a young, handsome Italian teenager and had a relationship with a married woman when he was 16. She became pregnant, and they knew it was my great-uncle because the husband was infertile. Also, this Norwegian couple suddenly had a dark-haired, olive-skinned child. It was a huge scandal that got hushed up, and the married couple ended up moving away. My grandma and her sisters were sworn to secrecy. My great-uncle has been gone for 10 years now. My grandma 12 years, and my mom 11. I don't know who else might know, and I feel trapped in silence about this when it comes to my mom's cousins. It haunts me. Story 4. My aunt married my mother's abuser. They are close in age and were both interested in the same guy who grew up near them on another farm. When my mom was 15 or 16, They were hanging out together and he assaulted her. My aunt told everyone she was lying, and my grandparents believed her. My mom pressed charges anyway, and my aunt went to court and gave him an alibi. He was acquitted, and my aunt went on to marry him and have a daughter with him. I believe he may have harmed her as well because she turned to substance abuse at a young age. The entire family simply accepted him as a member and silenced any objections by my mother. She had to see him at family functions and pretend it never happened in order to reconnect with her sister. No idea why she wanted to, but you only get one family. My mother eventually took her own life, and I believe the trauma and her family's support of the man who hurt her were the causes. It was a complete secret. I actually like this uncle. I only found out after she died when her husband got drunk and told everyone. It totally changed how I see my family. Story 5. Back in the day when my great-aunt was 16, she got pregnant out of wedlock. I guess they used to put some mothers under anesthesia when they gave birth. When she woke up, she was told the baby had died. She was devastated, and the loss had a profound effect on her mental health. She went through a series of difficult marriages. 30 years later, a woman appeared at her door. It was her daughter. While my great-aunt was unconscious, my great-great-grandmother had the nuns put the baby up for adoption. When she grew up, the daughter went looking for her birth mother. They instantly connected and had a beautiful relationship for the remainder of my great-aunt's life. Unfortunately, my great-aunt's life was taken very suddenly, and it had been rumored that her husband was responsible. It was never proven, even though there was evidence suggesting he was involved. He was very wealthy and had powerful friends, and he also threatened her daughter. She never came back. Although this story is very old, I only learned about it when my mom and aunts got drunk one Christmas. They had been told never to discuss it. Story 6. Most of my family knows that my grandfather refused several medals for his service in the Marines during World War II and became an agnostic, liberal vegetarian after the war. What they don't know is that it was because he was part of the brutal combat in the Pacific, pushing from island to island toward Japan, and he had to take lives in the process. I know he was part of the Solomon Islands campaign and fought at Guadalcanal, then eventually ended up at Okinawa, where he was when the war ended. He only opened up to me about this much later in life and told me about 2 of the incidents where he had to kill someone, but he alluded to there being more. I didn't get the impression that the 2 he told me about were chosen because they were the worst, just the ones he felt he could talk about. Over the years, every retelling included more detail. He was one of the most honest, true-to-their-word people I've ever known, and not prone at all to exaggerating stories. I haven't told much of the rest of the family because he didn't want to be considered a war hero, and there are parts of the family who would twist it into that. Story 7. I found out that I'm related to a couple of millionaires in Chile and a billionaire in Puerto Rico. Turns out my grandma was disowned after asking for money. She had gambled everything away. Now my mom and I struggle from month to month. I only found out after I saw a ripped check in the garbage for $200,000. I was stunned and looked up the names. I took a week away from my mom before I asked them why we never met or why I didn't know about them. Apparently they had tried numerous times over the years to help us, but my grandma taught my mom that they were not her family and that if they didn't want to give her money before, there was no reason to accept it now. The least I can say is that I'm angry. Story 8. When my granddad married my grandmom, she already had a daughter. He asked her once or twice who the real father was, but never got an answer. My grandmother also insisted that my grandfather adopt her daughter so she could take the new family name. My aunt, the daughter, knew that my grandfather wasn't her biological father, and she asked her mother once or twice per year who her real father was. She never got any answer. This went on until 2009, when my grandmother passed away. I was living with my grandparents at the time and took over most of the administrative stuff because my grandfather needed time to process the loss of the love of his life. While I was cleaning out some things, looking through pictures, making sure we had all her insurance documents ready, I found a letter that was dated 3 weeks before she died. She had written down everything she regretted not doing or saying before she passed. One of the things she wrote was the reason she never told anyone who the father of her first daughter was, and on top of that, there was also a name. I called my aunt, this was about a week after the funeral, so emotions were still raw, and told her about the letter. I said that if she really wanted to know who her biological father was, I could tell her. She hesitated and then decided that if I was asking like that, the answer might cause more harm than good. She said no, and we never spoke about it again. So yeah, I'm the only one who knows. I didn't share the letter with anyone else because it wasn't written for others to find. It was written so she could finally let go. Knowing my family, the news about my aunt's father would have spread quickly if someone else found that letter. And yes, it would have done more harm than good. Story 9. My great-grandfather on my father's side was part of the war and lost his arm. On my mother's side, my great-grandfather cheated on my great-grandmother constantly while also pressuring her into having more children. They ended up with 12 kids. All of them disliked him and knew about his cheating. He didn't even try to hide it. My great-grandmother was apparently severely depressed because of it. Eventually, their 12 kids, who loved their mom deeply, told her they wouldn't be upset if she found someone else. They wanted her to be happy and knew she couldn't leave him. They even helped her meet someone. She was terrified of my great-grandfather, but eventually did have a relationship. He kept demanding more children, so she secretly forged his signature to get her tubes tied and never told him. She later developed breast cancer and passed away when all 12 of her kids were well into adulthood. After the funeral, my great-grandfather was still abusive and bitter. He told his children they wouldn't get any of her belongings. She didn't have much, just fake jewelry and sentimental items. So the 12 broke into the trailer when their dad was asleep. They entered his room where he kept her things and took what they could to give to their kids. He woke up a minute after they left the bedroom and was furious. But they were finally free. Story 10. I was never told that my sister is my half-sister. Her dad passed away a few weeks before her first birthday. My dad met our mother, married her, and adopted my sister. It was a big secret, and I was never allowed to know. There was a photo album our mother had, and only my sister was allowed to look at it. When I was 11, a family friend babysat me and told me the truth. I kept it a secret for a few more years, and then asked my parents why they never told me. Their response was, it was never a secret. Also, my grandparents shared a house with his brother and his wife, my aunt. Turns out my grandfather had an affair with my aunt, and they had children. My dad was very close with his cousins, who were actually his brothers. He denies it. My dad is still friends with his first serious girlfriend. Her daughter came over to visit. I absolutely adored her, and we got along really well. A few years later, I went to visit her. One day we got lost and ended up laughing uncontrollably. Someone passing by said, "Wow, you can tell you're sisters. You look the same and even have the same laugh." We stopped laughing. It was awkward. Later that night, after a few drinks, we decided to take a photo together. A guy walked up and said, "I can take a picture of the sisters." We replied, "I wish." Then started talking about how we both think we might be sisters. The guy realized it was an awkward moment and left. The story is, her mom and my dad went traveling overseas. She got pregnant. My dad told her to terminate the pregnancy. She said she did, left him, and went home. She married my dad's best friend and had the baby. She asked her dad about it, but he never admitted anything. I won't ask my dad either. He doesn't deserve her as a daughter. She's amazing. Also, my husband's father is someone we've completely cut off. He behaved inappropriately toward me when I was 17 and disgusted me ever since. I didn't speak about it until a few years ago, after I had my daughter. I was warned by his family not to leave my child alone with him. We've been no contact for over 18 years, so it's not even a concern. More family members from both sides have come forward with stories. It supposedly involved both minors and adults. We have no concrete evidence, just word of mouth. But if I could, I would report him. I wish I could see him face justice. Story 11. I'm not supposed to know that my stepdad has spent between $20,000 to $50,000 over the years on lawyers, bail money, and settlements to keep his son out of jail or prison. My mom instantly regretted letting that one slip out, but she was upset because her stepson is a grown man in his 30s with very toxic views and a long list of legal troubles. He's had more DUIs than you can count, along with incidents involving public intoxication, assault, drug issues, steroid use, the works. He's honestly the kind of person I can't stand. I've only met him a couple of times because I moved out when I was 16 and my parents got together when I was 18. I visited my family a few times since then. I'm 33 now, and I just interact with my stepbrother in passing. I gave him a hug once, and he looked visibly uncomfortable. Later, I overheard him talking to his dad, my stepdad, saying how grossed out he felt being hugged by someone like me, and said, "What if he tries something? I'm not into that. I don't know where he's been. He lives on and off with his dad every 6 to 8 months to try and get clean or hold down a job. But every year he gets an offer for some high-paying construction job out west, and before long, there's a collect call from jail or a detox center like, "Dad, need you to bail me out." This especially frustrates me, and it's a big reason I've distanced myself from most of my family. My parents once had a huge fight because my stepdad was mad that my mom was paying to fly me out to visit. He said I should pay for myself. He's wealthy, by the way, and basically called me lazy and irresponsible. To be fair, I do drink a lot and I'm not great with money, but I've supported myself since I was 16, put myself through college, and earned 2 degrees. No one in my family has a degree except me. My mom has an associate's degree from the 90s. I have 2 BA degrees. I speak multiple languages, have lived all over the world, and I've never asked my family for a dime. My story is mine, and I find their judgment of my lifestyle extremely unfair, given everything. Unfortunately, I can't bring any of this up to my stepdad because I'm not supposed to know, and it would break his trust in my mom. Not that I care much about either of them at this point, but I'm not going to get involved. At the end of the day, I've never been to jail. I've paid my own way through life, and my stepdad thinks I'm spoiled because I couldn't afford to travel home, while he's literally spent tens of thousands keeping his own son, who's 10 years older than me, out of serious legal trouble. Story 12. That my uncle was dying of AIDS. The lengths his family and my dad went to in order to cover it up were honestly ridiculous. My sister found out from our drunk aunt, and of course, she immediately told me. We both thought it was absurd to try to keep it a secret. We asked our dad about it, and he got really uncomfortable and begged us not to tell anyone. My uncle had contracted HIV from a blood transfusion in Africa and was described as a good Catholic man, and no one needed to know according to them. Cue the biggest eye roll ever. Fast forward to my uncle's funeral. It was held in a small town, and I won't share specifics for privacy, but he was a well-known figure there. His funeral was literally broadcast on the local TV station, so nearly the whole town either attended or watched. The very first words out of the priest's mouth were, "His battle with AIDS was long and difficult." My dad's face turned completely pale, like all the color drained from him. It wasn't funny, but I had to stifle my laughter. This whole massive cover-up got exposed in seconds. I know I'm going to get judged for this, but it still makes me laugh. Story 13. Everyone in my family says my dad was murdered by his roommate, who hid his body for a year before it was found. I recently found the court documents, and it turns out it was ruled a reckless homicide. My dad had been struggling with depression and was reportedly threatening to take his own life. His roommate tried to take the weapon from him, and in the struggle, it went off, killing him instantly. Unable to cope, the roommate left the body where it fell in the kitchen and went on with his life. My grandmother even hired a private investigator who never found anything. Eventually, authorities got a search warrant for the house, and the roommate asked for legal counsel. I didn't even know about any of this until I was 10, because I forced my family to tell me, or else I said I'd go digging for the truth. Now I'm 23, and I just learned the rest of the story this past Thanksgiving. He died in 2001 or 2002. He had apparently been going through serious trauma that no one told me about. A cousin even said that my dad and his roommate may have been in a relationship and were planning to leave with me and start over. None of that was denied when I brought it up to my mother. The hard part is, if someone had just told me all of this earlier, I might have been better prepared, because I ended up going through nearly the same trauma myself. Instead, it only deepened my depression because I was constantly compared to someone I never really knew and felt no connection to. But now, with this new information, things finally make more sense. I actually feel a connection now because of what we both experienced. And in case you're wondering, I'm doing okay. I'm in therapy, taking my medication, and surrounded by the love of my partner and my daughter. I made a promise that she would grow up knowing the truth I was denied. Story 14. My great-aunt and great-uncle on my mom's side are actually her half-siblings. My grandmother had 2 children before marriage, and my great-grandparents adopted them. That was apparently pretty common at the time. The only person who doesn't know is my great-uncle. Both of them have serious mental health issues. My aunt has been in and out of comas and has delusions about harming people. My uncle has threatened most of the family at some point. The same grandmother essentially gave my mom to her full sister's first husband when she was a young teen. My grandfather had cancer and was dying. My mom dropped out of school early, and my grandmother wanted money. I found this out after my grandmother passed. That aunt still doesn't understand why I want nothing to do with her. For the record, I fully believe I was a child of convenience for my mom. She was 16, my dad was 18, and I think she saw him as an escape. That same aunt later married her ex-husband's nephew, while the ex-husband was seeing his brother's ex. This made him my cousin's cousin and stepdad. One of those cousins had a child with their cousin, who was the stepdad's half-sister. So he ended up being that kid's uncle and grandfather at the same time. That child was raised by my aunt. Yes, the same aunt. He harmed his half-sister and spent time in juvenile detention, only to be welcomed back into the same house by his grandmother because apparently, why not? On my dad's side, his mom left when he was young. His dad tried his best but had a criminal record from his teen years that made it hard to find work. He remarried, and my dad ended up with more step and half siblings than I can even name. Most struggled with addiction. His only full brother was later revealed to have harmed a stepdaughter. My sisters and I weren't supposed to know. As far as I know, nothing happened to any of us. Two of my cousins, who were closest to me in age, used to beat me. One time they tried to do something terrible to me, but I got away. The only person I've ever told is my wife, who heartbreakingly had a similar experience with someone she won't name. One of the cousins who tried to hurt me was later killed in a drug-related incident. The other crashed his motorcycle and is slowly deteriorating. I don't think that's everything, but it's all I can remember for now. I'm tired of typing. Story 15. I found out after my grandpa passed away that he had been a dangerous alcoholic. For as long as I can remember, I knew that my grandpa didn't drink. But when I discovered the reason why, I was shocked. He had been verbally and physically abusive to my grandma, nearly caused the death of my uncle in a drunk driving accident, and was emotionally hurtful toward all three of his children. His career was eventually put on the line. He was told if he didn't get sober and take his job seriously, he would be fired. So he got sober, but only to save his career. Later, when his wife, my grandma, passed away about 10 years ago, he basically erased any and all trace of her. He met a woman who was a divorcee, and together they traveled the country in their RV until he died. In his will, he gave her almost all of his belongings and money, leaving virtually nothing to my mom and her siblings. We then found out that he had been taking money from the trust my grandma left for her children. He had stolen over $1 million from her trust to pay for his travels. This was only discovered after he passed away. Story 16. My cousin Mike was tragically killed when he was 18. He had always been like an older brother to me, and his death hit our entire family really hard. This was in Sacramento in the early 2000s, and two of my other cousins were around the same age, late teens or early 20s. Mike was 18, and Ramsey was between 19 and 21 at the time. Both had gotten involved in growing and selling marijuana, which today wouldn't be shocking, but back then it was still illegal, and they hung out with people who had criminal records. They thought they were invincible. The story goes that one night, the two of them and another friend were at Ramsey's apartment in Natimus. They had a firearm and allegedly decided to play Russian roulette, not realizing there was a live round in the chamber. According to the account that spread, Mike held the weapon to his head and pulled the trigger, thinking it was empty, but it went off. The result was devastating. Blood was everywhere. My aunts later had to clean the apartment even after forensic teams finished their investigation. That was how Mike's life ended. But here's where it gets strange. After the incident, Ramsey and the friend left. No one knows where the third person went. Ramsey drove around for 4 hours, then called his sister, my cousin Amanda, and finally called the police. According to the autopsy, there was no gunpowder on Mike's hands, which was unusual if he had truly fired the weapon himself. Another cousin and I have long believed that something else happened, possibly an argument, a mistake, or even something worse. We've never been able to prove or disprove it, but we're certain of one thing. Mike didn't do this to himself. Story 17. I learned that my mom had a horrible childhood that left her with serious mental health issues, many of which she refuses to acknowledge. Her father had schizophrenia, which went largely untreated in those days, and he was controlling and abusive. He regularly hurt both my grandmother and all 6 of their children. They lived in poverty and isolation, and my grandmother would often run into the woods when things got bad, leaving the children alone with him. She also took out her frustration on the children emotionally. As a result, all the children, now adults and grandparents themselves, are affected in different ways. Outward appearances and seeming normal are extremely important to them, so none of these painful events are ever discussed. I only learned pieces of the truth by talking to my cousins. My mother rarely acknowledges anything. Sadly, my mom carried that behavior into her own parenting. She was strict and hurtful toward both me and my brother. When she attempted to harm herself or threatened to do so, it was brushed off as just stress. It's been a painful cycle. I'm doing my best to break that cycle by going to therapy now. Story 18. I am the reason why my entire father's side and mother's side of the family split apart, maybe even caused a complete breakdown in my dad's family. I am the 32nd generation male in our family lineage. It's a very large family with deep Korean heritage and a proud legacy. Everyone seemed to adore me, none more than my grandma on my dad's side, but she was universally loved by the whole family too. One day when I was about 4, I was allegedly sitting on her lap, begging her to keep playing with me. At some point, she suffered a heart attack. I didn't know what a heart attack was at the time, of course, and I had no idea what had happened. The family was torn apart by it. One side blamed me, saying it could have been prevented and if he wasn't bothering her, she might still be alive. The other side defended me. I was just 4. This, combined with other issues, eventually led to me being orphaned. I was passed around between different countries and family friends, growing up without a stable home. Eventually, I found some family again. I'm now back in Korea as an adult. The family remains divided and nothing has ever been resolved. I know almost nothing about my dad's side and only a little about my mom's side. Oh, and I also know that I'm supposed to inherit a traditional Korean sword from my grandfather. He told me before he passed, but now no one will tell me where it is or why it's being hidden. It's a family treasure, so I understand the secrecy, but I still want to see it someday. Story 19. I still don't know to this day to what extent my grandpa was involved with the Nazis. He passed away years ago, and the only person who might know is my grandma, who absolutely refuses to talk about that time in her life. It seems like that entire period is one big trauma for her, and even topics not directly related to my grandfather are hard for her to discuss. What broke my heart was realizing that my grandfather, the man I only knew as gentle, selfless, and kind, had lied to me. As I got older and started asking questions, he told me he was a nurse during the war and was later sent to Russia. That's always where he stopped and gave vague answers like, I didn't care much about politics, I just wanted to find enough food for the family. After he passed, we found a document showing that he had joined the SS during the last year of the war. Even my dad didn't know. When he pressed my grandma for answers, she said, "You have no idea how it really was." At the end, people were just signed into the SS and saying no wasn't really an option. I just want to know the truth. I've never once heard a racist comment from my grandparents, and they treated my ex, who was black, with complete kindness and respect. Story 20. My great-aunt couldn't have children because she had a medical procedure go horribly wrong when she was younger. She had gotten pregnant after experiencing prolonged abuse from her father, my great-grandfather. Later in life, she married a man, and together they adopted a daughter. Sadly, he harmed the adopted daughter to such a devastating degree that she was placed under permanent psychiatric care, and no one in the family knows where she is now. My great-aunt eventually left him and later married the kindest man I'd ever met. He passed away 2 years ago from complications related to a severe flu, COVID-19. Another side of this painful family history, which I shouldn't even know, is that my great-uncle later harmed my biological mom. Some believe he mirrored behavior he learned from his own father. When I found out, I was furious and told my grandmother that I never wanted him near me again. But she chose to ignore it, just as she had chosen to ignore what happened to her daughter. He ended up showing up to my college graduation party. I refused to speak to him, and he awkwardly left about 15 minutes later, but not before his wife gave him photos of their children. Story 21. The man I knew as my paternal grandfather was not my dad's biological father. My grandmother and her cousin fled Poland in the late 1930s due to the political situation at the time. During their long journey, nearly 2 years from Poland to the U.S., she met a man in Switzerland who was Armenian. They lived together for a while in Toronto before eventually relocating to Chicago. As soon as they got to Chicago, the Armenian man was drafted into the army. Left alone, my grandmother found a job and moved in with another Polish girl. Their neighbor's son had just graduated high school, and she and that young man, my grandfather, hit it off. About 2 months later, he too was drafted, being just 18. A month after that, my grandmother realized she was pregnant. 6 months later, she gave birth to my father. My grandfather had been captured by German forces and spent over a year in a prison camp before he was freed. He didn't return to the U.S. for another year, and when he did, he and my grandmother assumed the child was his. They married and later had another child, my aunt. The Armenian man never returned from the war, or if he did, he never contacted my grandmother again. She never told anyone the truth until she was on her deathbed. Story 22. Here goes. A few years before my dad passed away, he sat down and had a conversation with me. He started by apologizing for everything I had to endure with a foster brother we once had. My parents thought it would be good to foster a child around my age, but he turned out to be incredibly difficult. He would steal or break my toys and personal things and caused all kinds of trouble. When he was about 12 or 13, he and a neighbor became close with two young girls who also lived nearby. One summer, they were caught by one of the girls' fathers doing something deeply disturbing in a tent in the backyard. Despite the severity of the situation, it was covered up by all the families involved, and nothing was ever officially done. I didn't find out about it until much later. The foster brother stayed with us for years until he eventually ran away at 18. But that's not even the secret I'm really sharing. Back to the main story. My dad apologized for all that and then told me what my mom had been up to for decades. He said he had to bail her out of serious credit card debt 3 times, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. The third and final time, he was retired and had to remortgage the house to cover the debt. Then he told me something even more shocking. Back in the 70s or 80s, my mom forged his signature to remortgage the house without his knowledge. When he confronted her, she simply said, "It's only money." He told me the only reason he didn't divorce her was because of my brother and me. I told him he should have left. My dad passed nearly 10 years ago, and I miss him dearly. My mom passed nearly 8 years ago. I never confronted her about what she did to him because she would have denied it all, just like she always did. When I was clearing out the house after her passing, I found a piece of paper my dad had hidden. It listed the debts she had racked up during that last bailout. Multiple credit cards, some with balances in the 5 digits, totaling just shy of £50,000. We were never a wealthy family. I'm partly glad I don't know the total amount my dad paid over the years because if I had known, I might have disowned her before she died. She wasn't a kind person. She was rude to almost everyone, including my dad. One Christmas, I hosted the family at my house, and she openly mocked my dad at the dinner table because he had trouble sleeping and was sleeping in his armchair. I finally snapped and told her if she didn't stop, she could go sit in the car and wait there. So, that's my story. I hope it makes sense. Looking forward to spending Christmas this year peacefully with just my wife and our 3 dogs, our kids. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Story 23. All right, in about 2011, I found out that I had an older brother. My mother graduated high school while pregnant and gave him up for adoption shortly afterward. She wasn't sure if my dad was his father. I tried over the years to get in touch with the adoption agency, but Catholic Charities was very strict about releasing information. I tried different approaches through the years, but to no avail. Fast forward, it's 2019, and I've made radical choices to improve my life and mental health. I decided I was going to find him. I saved up and planned on doing an ancestry DNA test. I was at a family Christmas with my dad's sister and told her how excited I was to find my brother. She got upset and told me not to look into things that weren't my business. It made me angry. I haven't spoken to her since. I did the DNA test. I waited. I matched with someone. Who is this person? I went on Facebook to a group called Search Angels. A woman helped me navigate the family tree, and we determined that the mystery woman on my DNA test was, in fact, my biological grandmother. I was shocked. My dad had been adopted, and we'd always been told we had no information about his family history. I messaged the woman and we chatted, and I received a photo of her. I thought, okay, I guess this is what I'll look like when I'm older. I asked her about the past and why she had given up my dad. This is the secret. My uncle is actually my biological grandfather. After thinking about it, little details through the years started making sense. There was a dark reason we didn't talk about it. He had always been the black sheep of the family and was also gay. I found out that he had done deeply disturbing things to my dad when he was just a toddler. My aunt had been trying to protect my dad, but he already knew. We all knew something was off, but we didn't know that my uncle was my dad's father. My aunt has not forgiven me for uncovering this, but don't worry, there's a happy ending. Fast forward again to June 20th of 20. I had just submitted my final assignment for my master's degree and was thrilled to have maintained a 3.9 GPA. I'd been checking my email and Ancestry on and off for 6 months, waiting for any messages from my possible brother. The next day, I got a Facebook message from a man who said we'd matched on Ancestry. It was my brother. It was really him. I messaged him immediately and added my sister to the conversation. I checked Ancestry, and he was my full biological brother meaning both of my parents were his parents. He was shocked to learn that he not only had one sister but two, and that both parents were still together in a loving family. I want you to know that finding my brother has been the most joyous event of my life. I love him so much. He's very similar to me despite growing up as an only child in the Delta. We now celebrate holidays together and talk almost every day. I was 30 years old when I met my brother. I now have a niece and a sister-in-law. It's been incredible and totally worth unearthing the family secret to find him. Story 24. My late grandmother once opened up to me about how her relationship with my grandpa began. The story I always knew was that she fell in love with him because he knew how to dance rock and roll. That led to a lifelong marriage and what seemed like a happy and prosperous life together. But my grandma told me something different. She said she didn't want to be with my grandpa at first, but he was persistent. He threatened to hurt himself and even got his mother to pressure her into going out with him. She said they did end up having a good life together, but I could sense she never stopped wondering what might have been if she had made different choices. She asked me not to tell anyone until after she passed away. She's been gone for years now, but I've never told anyone. No one else in the family needs to know. Their love story, as everyone else knows it, is too beautiful. From beginning to end, I'd rather let them keep believing in that version than share a painful truth. Story 25. My parents loved talking about our family line and all the great accomplishments in our history, but it always confused me that they never mentioned my great-grandmother. They would go into great detail about ancestors going back generations, but always skipped her. I assumed she had died early or maybe divorced my great-grandfather after having kids. One day during an Easter scavenger hunt with close relatives, I sneaked into the attic thinking the biggest egg would be there. Instead, I found a small pink egg and a bunch of old boxes. Being curious, I looked inside nearly every box to see if I could find something cool. I found some old records, awards, and photos. Then one photo with my great-grandfather caught my eye. Not because of him, but because of the woman standing next to him. I thought she had died or something. It was just a normal family photo, but seeing her was surprising. Beside the photo was a diary. I looked at the first few pages but didn't understand much, so I put it in my basket and moved on. My mind quickly drifted from the photo and diary once I saw my sister holding the biggest egg, and I totally forgot to ask my parents about what I found. Fast forward a few years, I'd matured, experienced more of life, and was trying to save up for my own phone. My parents didn't want to pay for one, so I babysat, mowed lawns, tutored, and even planned a yard sale. While searching for things to sell, I found the old diary again. I laughed, remembering how I had thought it was something special as a kid. I opened it again out of curiosity, and I was shocked. The entries described disturbing plans and thoughts, including accounts of harming people. The most unsettling part was how casually it was written, like the writer was just going through a phase. I immediately closed the diary and ran downstairs to tell my parents. But then I stopped. They'd probably take it and lock it away. So I decided to keep it hidden in a secret compartment in my closet, where I usually stash sweets and books. I still read it from time to time, and every time I do, I uncover more about her psychological struggles. She clearly needed help she never received. On a lighter note, I did eventually save enough money for the phone. Story 26. That my uncle died by suicide and didn't pass away from natural causes. He had Parkinson's disease, and our whole family was helping him through it and supporting him as much as we could. He was incredibly smart, so intelligent, in fact, that he made his own adjustments to the neurostimulator implanted in him. Deep brain stimulation, or DBS for short, which is used to reduce tremors in people with Parkinson's. The changes he made were actually reviewed by the people who designed the device, and they ended up implementing some of his suggestions into existing models. We were told that he died from Parkinson's, but a few years later, when I was old enough, my mom pulled me aside and told me the truth, that he had taken his own life. Only a few of us know. My brother doesn't even know. Apparently, my aunt came home from work and found him. A few months before his death, he had mentioned feeling like a burden to the family. I miss him deeply, and I'm grateful for the few fond memories I have of him from when I was young. He was a brilliant, kind person, one of the kindest I've ever known. Story 27. When I was 8 or 9, one of my older half-brothers got intoxicated and harmed his preteen daughter. His 2 children were then sent to live in another province with their mother, and he went to jail for a while. My parents told me he had moved there for a job, and I vividly remember writing him letters almost every day, thinking it was so cool that he worked at a jail. When he was released, somehow my dad convinced his probation officer to let him live with us, despite the fact that he wasn't supposed to be near children. There were conditions, like I could never be alone with him. But my parents told me to lie to the probation officer if I was ever asked about it. I remember thinking it was strange that someone kept visiting to ask me questions about my brother, but I shrugged it off since my parents didn't seem to care. Years later, as a teenager, I was messaging my cousin, his daughter, and that's when I found out the truth. I kind of understand why my dad did what he did. My half-brother was always quiet and awkward, and my dad would do anything for his kids. That particular son was definitely his favorite among his older children. Still, thinking about it makes me really uncomfortable. There were so many times I was alone with him for hours, and anything could have happened. Most of the older members of the family know the truth. For a while, my cousins were bouncing around the foster system. Most of the younger family, especially the nieces and nephews, have no idea. And even though nothing has happened in all the years since he got out of jail, I still get uneasy whenever someone invites him over to be around their kids. Story 28. Not sure this qualifies since I'm not 100% certain, but I think my parents got married because my mom was pregnant with my older brother. The story goes that they were together for 3 years before getting married. My mom was 19 and my dad was 22. They were a terrible match. There was a history of domestic violence, and they eventually divorced. It was a small wedding, and in the photos, my mom looks unusually heavy. Those wedding photos are the only time I ever saw her with extra weight before she turned 40. Right after the wedding, they moved to Australia and had my brother there. My mom claims he was a honeymoon baby, but I've never tried to find the actual wedding date. I know she'd lie, and it's not worth the trouble. My family is the type to hide things instead of being open and talking honestly. Also, my uncle got his ex-girlfriend pregnant when he was a teenager. The baby was put up for adoption. I think I'm one of the very few people who know about it. Not even his wife does. That same uncle has also been to prison 3 times for selling drugs and being involved in serious street fights. That's another secret. I'm sure there are more that I can't remember right now. Story 29. My grandmother has pretty severe Alzheimer's. For some background context, she had my dad when she was 15, and my grandpa was 19 at the time. They got married because she was pregnant. Later, they had my aunt and divorced shortly after. However, after many years apart, they began living together again when she was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My grandpa wanted to take care of her. Eventually, it became too much for him to handle, and my dad and aunt made the decision to place her in a nursing home. My dad, his sister, my aunt, and both of our families were tasked with cleaning out and selling her house when the time came. While going through her things, we found a small phone number book that she had apparently used as a sort of diary as well. In it, we discovered that right around the time she became pregnant with my dad by my grandpa, she had also been secretly seeing another man. According to her writing, she claimed to like this other man more because he was better looking and more physically affectionate. But my grandpa made more money, so she decided to marry him instead. That was a shocking moment, but my dad and aunt kind of brushed it aside. Honestly, I was surprised they weren't more surprised. But my grandmother had always been a very difficult person when she was well. She could be angry, mean, and spiteful. And she definitely played favorites with the grandkids. Story 30. Apparently my 31 million oldest brother, maybe my second oldest too, but probably not, is actually the child of my mom and her third cousin. I think it's my mom's dad's cousin's child. Everyone older in the family knows they had a strange relationship when they were younger, but no one officially confirms whether my brother's legal father is really his biological one. At a funeral for someone on that side of the family, a drunk aunt was talking about how my brother should try to form a real relationship with his real dad. Nothing ever came of it officially. My mom's sister more or less admitted that she didn't know the full nature of their relationship either, but hinted that it may have been more than just a close family bond. Either way, this whole story really messed with my sister emotionally. She's always had a rocky relationship with our mom. For context, my 2 brothers, 12 and 10 years older than me, and my sister, 6 years older than me, are from a different father, so legally we're half siblings, but we were never raised that way. So to me, this wasn't a big deal, but to my sister, it really affected her for a while after we found out. Story 31. We all know now because we did some research, but I'm pretty sure my grandma never wanted us to find out. I don't think she even knew the full truth herself, and she certainly didn't want to talk about it. She was a devout Christian, the kind who didn't believe in divorce, and considered it extremely shameful. She got married and had my aunt. As soon as my aunt was born, her husband filed for divorce and disappeared. We don't know where he went. She was incredibly ashamed of it and never spoke about it, not even with my aunt. Later, she met a man fresh out of the Navy. He had served in Operation Husky. That's important later. They got married and she became pregnant with my mom. Once again, after my mom was born, her husband filed for divorce and vanished. The only thing my mom ever knew about him was his last name, that he had been in the Navy, and that he was never part of her life. Years later, my mom was doing some digging on Facebook and came across someone with her biological father's last name living a few states away. They started talking, and it turned out that his dad was also her dad. The funny part? He told her that his father had also disappeared right after he was born. That kicked off even more digging. Eventually, we traced this man's trail. After Operation Husky, he was stationed in Italy for a while, where he married, had kids, divorced, and fled back to the U.S. Then he went to Ohio, met my grandma, married her, had a kid, divorced, and moved to South Carolina. There he married again, had another child, divorced, and vanished again. He repeated this process several more times until he eventually passed away out west. The only group we haven't made contact with are the Italian children he had while stationed overseas. It's wild to think that this man had a pattern of marrying women, having kids, and disappearing over and over again. My grandma was deeply ashamed of her divorces, and I know she'd be devastated to learn that she had fallen for someone like that. Maybe it's a good thing she never found out. Story 32. My grandma has been threatening to take her own life in front of my grandpa since around 1971. We still don't know exactly why, but we believe he may have threatened to leave her around that time. In the 1980s, she began hurting herself. She once crashed her car into a tree, claiming the brakes failed and wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Her head went through the windshield. After that, she went full hypochondriac and claimed to have nearly every illness imaginable as a result of the crash. She'd seek sympathy from family, regularly saying she was having heart attacks. She also spread stories about her father, my great-grandfather, saying he'd get drunk and hurt her, but many in the family believed those stories weren't true and were used to gain pity. By the late 90s, she began throwing herself downstairs and calling the incidents accidental. By 2010, she was breaking bones and seeking even more attention. By that point, most of the family had spiraled into their own issues, and the only people left to give her sympathy were Grandpa and her doctors. I eventually confronted her and my grandfather together. She then threatened to harm herself in front of me and started listing everything she had ever done for me as a way to guilt me. I haven't spoken to her since about 2 years ago, and I don't plan to. She's in her 80s now and becoming more verbally abusive, from what I hear from the few people who still visit. There's so much more to the story, but I don't have the energy to write it all out. She never admitted or denied anything. She just resorted to threats when confronted. Story 33. On my paternal grandmother's side, we were told there were probably horse thieves. That's all my great-grandfather ever shared about her history. Turns out everything we've learned since is far worse. On my paternal grandfather's side, it was preachers and pirates. And honestly, given the preachers I've met, the pirates wouldn't have been out of place. My maternal grandfather's lineage is mostly what they called nobility, which seems to be code for some of the most unpleasant people imaginable. If you don't know what I mean, look up the Medici. Also, there's Portuguese heritage, but I don't know the details. I've asked multiple historians about the family name on that side. Strangely enough, every time I've brought it up, they've gone pale. I've even been asked to leave shops, thousands of miles from where my ancestors ever lived. Here are just a few highlights. One man beat his wife one too many times. She waited until he was asleep, then sewed him into his blanket and hit him with a cast iron skillet. He woke up from a coma, still in a full body cast, and she lovingly spoon-fed him soup while warning him not to test her again. Another man got his wife's sister pregnant. His wife still raised the children and cared for her sister, who had been disowned by her own family. If I recall, there was more to that story, but it gets mixed up with tales of someone else who suddenly decided he was a preacher and went off to start churches, despite not supporting his wife and 9 children, except for rare visits. There are things I'm not comfortable sharing here, even after reading hours of confessions on this thread. For example, it's said that someone in the family once joked that castor oil, in high enough doses, could cause someone to die from severe illness. That kind of thing was passed around in knitting circles by older relatives. One of them even wrote it down seriously. The rest is mostly hearsay, and any real witnesses are long gone. Story 34. My uncle physically harmed my cousin so badly when he was young that it led to permanent brain damage, which later developed into a form of meningitis. He became disabled for the rest of his short life. We had been best friends. Then one day he was just unable to walk or talk. I was so young I didn't understand. They just told me he got sick, which was half true. When I asked my grandma, she said he had an ear infection that spread to his brain. Years later, I talked to my dad, and he told me the full story. My uncle used to hurt both my cousin and my aunt. He suspected that my cousin wasn't biologically his, and that fueled his anger. One day he hit him so hard that he was never the same again. I asked my grandma if that was true, and she confirmed that my uncle had been violent in the past. I don't understand why they kept this hidden for so long. I don't know if my cousin's siblings are even aware. There are a lot of secrets in the family, but this one truly shocked me. My dad cried for a long time after it happened. He used to babysit us, so my cousin was like a brother to me. I just found out the truth nearly 23 years later. Story 35. My mom used to talk to one of my aunts quite frequently. I've always been outspoken politically, but I'm never hostile about it. I believe we need to have difficult conversations with our family, and family members are often the best mirrors for our beliefs. One morning before I woke up, my aunt was on speakerphone, and I overheard her call me and my brother freaking stupid for being liberals. She doesn't know that I actually don't fully agree with the left, right, or center. I believe society as a whole needs to reorient its values entirely. Her comment really annoyed me, especially because she basically parrots everything she hears from the media, specifically Tucker Carlson. While spending her time at home doing very little, her kids are already over 21. That's not to say stay-at-home moms don't work. I absolutely respect them. My own mom stayed at home to raise me and my brother, but once we got older and more independent, she transitioned back into the workforce by cleaning houses and taking odd jobs. My aunt didn't do any of that. She just passes judgment. Story 36. Apparently, my grandmother was extremely emotionally and mentally abusive to my mom. She had to have all the dishes and a huge list of other chores done before her mom and stepdad got home from work. If even one fork was left in the sink, she'd get grounded for weeks. She never had free time. If she was struggling in school, she'd get grounded to her room for months. She took on 2 jobs just to avoid being at home and tried so hard to be the good girl. My mom and my uncle were both physically mistreated by her stepfather. My mom was thrown out of the house multiple times and told never to come back, and that no one would care if she didn't survive. She couch hopped and slept at parks on benches or slides because she was afraid to go home. When my mom was 15, one of her exes falsely told my grandmother that she was using substances and going to school intoxicated. That was never true. My mom has never touched a drug in her life and drinks very rarely. Teachers even lied and said she came to school under the influence. When my mom got pregnant at 17 with my older brother, she was completely shunned by the family. She wasn't allowed at gatherings, didn't receive gifts anymore, nothing, all because she wouldn't terminate the pregnancy. After he was born, some family members even told my brother that his mom was a bad girl and that he would grow up to be unintelligent and ashamed of her. I only learned all of this because my grandmother got drunk and started telling my little sister how terrible of a teenager my mom was. When my sister told me, I asked my mom, "Didn't she make you sleep at the park sometimes?" My mom broke down crying while driving. I've never looked at my grandmother the same way since. Story 37. My great-grandparents apparently kept a major secret from everyone except their oldest son, my grandfather, who was an infant at the time. My great-grandfather was a heavy drinker. What made it worse was that this happened during Prohibition. He frequented sketchy places and one night got extremely intoxicated at a speakeasy. He got into a confrontation with a group of people and insulted someone's mother. A fight broke out and the police were alerted to the illegal venue. He managed to escape along with a few others, including some from the group he had clashed with. Not long after, their house was broken into, a threatening note left behind, along with a dead rat, clearly a warning. Turns out, the group he had angered were part of the mob and had been running the speakeasy that night. Fearing for his family's safety, he packed up my great-grandmother and my infant grandfather and moved them across the country. To hide their identity, he even altered our last name by dropping the O to make it sound French instead of Italian. I didn't learn any of this until my grandfather's deathbed. He told me everything, how the name change was intentional, how they went into hiding. It was a lot to take in, but it explained why that entire part of our history was always so vague. Story 38. My great-great-grandmother was born during pioneer times and traveled out to the area where our family still lives today. She was the only girl among 6 boys. By her late teens, 4 of her brothers had died. One from typhus, one from tuberculosis, one was shot, and one simply wandered off during a journey and was never seen again. Seriously, by the time she was grown, she only had one sibling left, and she was fiercely protective of him. She married, had my great-grandfather and great-granduncle. Her husband became the first sheriff of the town, and her son, my great-grandfather, became a respected lawyer. His protege, my grandfather, would go on to become the state attorney for child law. My great-great-grandmother died in 1931 at the age of 65, and the story always was that she fell off a fence on the farm. This version of events was never questioned. I grew up hearing that same story over and over. Then last Christmas, one of my cousins shared what he had found while researching our family history. He had come across her obituary, and it listed pneumonia as the cause of death, not a fall. That didn't make sense to him. When he asked his dad, my uncle, he just said, "I don't know why it says that." That likely wasn't a cover-up, just ignorance. So my cousin kept digging. Eventually, he found a newspaper clipping that said, "Local woman slain in home," and it had my great-great-grandmother's name. It mentioned that she had been found dead in her home, where she lived with her husband and her brother, someone my grandma used to describe as touched in the head. That uncle had always been referred to vaguely, but my cousin found records showing he had been mentally unstable and had violent outbursts. There were arrest warrants from before 1910, and from 1915 to 1927, he was in prison. When released, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law and lived with them until her death. After that, he was committed to an asylum in Washington, where he died 5 years later. He reportedly showed signs of regret over his sister, and my great-grandfather once said, "I'd kill the man if I ever saw him again." So, here's the running theory. She and her brother had an argument. He became violent, hit her with something, and she died. Her husband, an ex-sheriff, organized a quiet manhunt. They captured the brother and, rather than prosecute him publicly, likely due to the stigma in the Great Depression just beginning, paid to have him placed in an asylum far away. The coroner listed pneumonia to avoid scandal. The family story was altered, saying she fell off a fence.